So to get the discussion rolling, I wanted to put forth, maybe bring us up to date now. What are some of the current preoccupations that each of you is working on?
Yesterday it was being on the plane, and on the plane we wrote a few Chicago's. Chicago's is constrained like a devinette. It's quite tricky to explain because we do that in French usually. And so we did some, because next week we have a reading at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and so we have to do that. So we were working on the plane. So this is the last preoccupation. Apart from this, really, where will the next meeting take place is another preoccupation. We don't know who's going to cook, which is because we eat at each other, just like that. And so maybe, last time it was Hervé, and next time, I don't know. Maybe I will have to cook something. So those are preoccupations. And from a very theoretical point of view, I think Hervé is better than me for that. Theory isn't very good at theory.
No, not. So, as you may notice, there's no collective position in OuLiPo. Every position is individualistic, and every way of writing is individualistic. You can hide the constraint, you can show a constraint, you can even write with no constraint, which our president does so often that he shouldn't be the president.
No, I am president because of that.
So he can be objective, because he doesn't use it. There's no real direction. There has been a tendency which has been grown over the last 17 years from the beginning of oral presentations of our work, which is to go a bit more inside what we could call orality.
Troubadourism.
Yeah, troubadourism. And there has been a recent advance in the last 6 months, which is going into improvisation, which has been tried by Jacques Jouet. We have a week, an annually workshop, which is about 1 week long, and with his group, there's about 100 people going to this workshop, and with his group, which was about 12 people, he tried something very new for us, which is improvisation. So it was very interesting. The result was very interesting, very new for us. And this is one of the many directions we go into. And this was totally new because we are very much outside of this general idea of improvisation. But it's very structured improvisation because people improvise in structures which they know very well, like haiku, like morale élémentaire, which we have seen. But they have 2 minutes after something is given to them to improvise a poem, which is new. Daniel?
I would add to that only that I think there's a preoccupation with where more new blood is going to come from. Because initially there was not a strict separation, but just sort of an ad hoc separation between the OuLiPo and the other OuLiPos. And the most recent recruit is this guy Etienne, who is a cartoonist, who's a very literary cartoonist, but he doesn't write prose, he doesn't write poetry, he writes sort of poetry masquerading as cartoons or vice versa. And I think that's opened up the gates to the potential of finding new people whose endeavors have 1 foot in literature and 1 foot in some other medium, which is exciting, but also kind of a vertiginous.
Yes, you can have surprises. So when we recruited, for example, Olivier Salon, we did it because he was a mathematician. He was teaching math at high level. He was brilliant. And now he's an actor. And a writer. but he no longer teaches math. He no longer does math. So he switched completely. The very day he was elected at the OuLiPo, switched and just become another destiny, which is quite strange. And it happened again with Michel Audin. She still teaches math, but she became a writer. And she publishes at Gallimard now, and she's writing and writing and writing. And so we have strange surprises of that kind.
To give an example of what can happen when someone is co-opted to the OuLiPo and who comes from somewhere else, like for example Etienne Lecroix, who's a member of OuLiPo, it's true that he made cartoons, only cartoons. And then when he came to OuLiPo, he invented a kind of poem which is very interesting because it draws the picture of someone using characters of the chasse unique.
Fixed width.
Yes, a fixed width. And this is very difficult to do, extremely difficult to do. And he invented a form in which he has made the picture of Pérec, the picture of Roubaud, the picture of Queneau, I think already. It takes him a long time to make a poem because it's about 50 lines, and these 50 lines, when you see it from far away, you see only the picture of someone, and when you come closer, you see him. And the poem has a real meaning, very clever meaning. And this is something that we never thought about, because of course, it existed before. There's examples, for example, from a poem which is drawn in the shape of a pear. To appear in Poire, to make fun of Louis-Philippe, who was always drawn in the shape of a pear. So this is not totally new, but the way he does it is totally new. And this is an example of what happens when you take someone from one art to another one.
Daniel earlier mentioned the connection to pataphysics. Paul Bradford once said, if pataphysics is the science of imaginary solutions, the OuLiPo could be the search for real solutions to imaginary problems. So can you speak of the importance of pataphysics to the project a little more? Especially in reference to the Society of Jean-Baptiste Boutule.
No, this is something else. Jean-Baptiste Boutule has nothing to do with pataphysics. But at the very beginning of the OuLiPo, members of the OuLiPo were members of the Pataphysics College. Which is not the case today. And so things are not, we are not as close as we used to be with pataphysics. I am the régent du Collège de Pataphysique, régent de bicyclotologie théorique et pratique. Mais, apart from that, this is it. We never go to the meetings of the pataphysics. And there are stronger, I must say, there are stronger links between pataphysics and OuPinPo, pouvoir de peinture potentielle, than with OuLiPo. And we have inside the OuLiPo a few members that are really against the idea of being close to pataphysics.
Do you ever worry that you might be infiltrated by pataphysics?
Oh, we are deliberately infiltrated, but we don't know who is infiltrated. That's complicated. But we are, of course. This is exactly what we expect of life, being infiltrated. Now, we don't know exactly. But I think that the Académie Française is trying to do something inside the OuLiPo. We wanted to be a candidate to the Académie Française, but they do not have hats with 11 toes, so that doesn't work. But we wanted, as a group, to be members of the Académie Française. It didn't work.
Well, if it's just a haberdashery problem.
Yeah, exactly. But this is exactly a problem for the Académie Française.
So we have a workshop coming up on Saturday. What could you tell some of the people who are going to be participants? What should they do to prepare themselves for the ordeal?
Drink.
Paper and pen. Paper and pen, and a couple of good beers can help. No, but relax and enjoy. No, that's the idea is simply that, constraint. We do a lot of atelier d'écriture. Constraint makes the writing possible here and now. If I come and I ask, please write a beautiful poem. That's going to be very difficult. But if I come and ask you, okay, let's write a little something without using the letter E, everybody's going to write immediately, just to check it's possible. And so then you get something. You get something, which is text. And that text, that can be good. It can be fantastic. That can be beautiful. That can be something else. You never know. And so that's the idea. The general idea for those ateliers is, the constraint is it's a piece of joy, in fact. So I hope you will come on Saturday.
Yeah, just add to that, the most liberating thing I think in having attended and also led some of these workshops is embracing the fact that nothing of literary quality is going to come out of it. That's I've been to the workshop that Hervé was talking about in Bourges for a week. I've gone 4 times, twice as a participant, twice as a leader, and I've been initially frustrated by the idea that nothing I was writing was good, was anything that I would want to publish or even read again. And then at some point I realized that was the point, that it was just the writing, the act of writing, the act of generating this text that was so rewarding for itself, and that aspiring to a greater literary quality is absolutely not the point.
Exactly. Exactly. And there is no judgment on the text, on the quality of the text. You produce text, if it respects the constraint, it's good. This is it. This is it. There is no aesthetic.
I have a question, because OuLiPo arose back in the days of analog technology, pen and paper. And now with digital technology, one of the things that's happened is that anybody can be a writer, anyone can be a musician, anyone can be a filmmaker, etc., because anyone can do anything they want. I'm curious about how the idea of having restrictions and constraints can help people now do things when in fact they can do anything they want. And nobody does anything.
But do people really do anything they want? I've never seen that. I've never seen that. This is not in human nature, I think. I don't know. I don't compose music. I don't do painting, even with my beautiful computer. I don't know. I write, nothing changed. One day I just dropped my pen to pick up the screen, but I think that nothing really changed. Novels are not better. Poems are not better than they used to be. And the tool is a tool. We have made something, on the side of OuLiPo, which is called OuLiPo, Atelier de littérature assisté par la mathématique et les ordinateurs. Huh? It's not so fantastic, I must say. It's still, you still have to create something, and the computer cannot create for you. So I think I do the same thing.
Tu réponds? Qui est dans l'informatique?
There's nothing more to say. I think writing with a computer has changed some things. For example, it may allow you to be more modular, to change paragraphs, to move them very easily, to change. Nothing is ever stopped when you're on a computer. The second thing that changes maybe is cooperative writing. This is more possible than ever. If you make a document for many writers, they all can work on this document. This is something new, totally new, which we sometimes use. But if you are alone in front of a computer, or if you're alone in front of a piece of paper with a pen, nothing changes. It's still the same. It's just a tool.
At the very beginning of computing, I was in publishing business at that time, and manuscripts were coming and they were not finished. All of a sudden, those manuscripts were not finished because they were clean. And the guy thought the book was finished because it was clean, but it was not written. So there was still something to do, and so they did it. And that was the idea.
The OuLiPo is a fairly small group with a defined membership, but procedural art and algorithmic art is a very large movement, and it's growing really fast now, especially in the visual arts, but with a lot of procedural literature going on. So I'm wondering about the interface of this large and growing community and this kind of like historic and tight community.
Should have said something for the last question. I think there's not very much of one. Then that's, in a sense, I don't want to say that's why the other expos were created, but I think that's the way it's shaken out, is that there are these other, like, what allows the OuLiPo to focus on literature, the Li in LiPo, is the same thing that says there can be a whole different group of people who thinks that the fundamental ideas of using constraint, using mathematical structures, and using really quantifiable models to bring to bear on artistic endeavors. Let's try that out in.
But even in literature, right? There's all the Markov chain people that are making all sorts of interesting mathematical prose, right?
To love them.
And that they're not members of the OuLiPo.
Oh no, they're not.
But you know about them.
No, we read them.
All right.
Oh yes. We read. Of course, I have to read all the books by Hervé Tellier and by Daniel Levin Becker, so it takes a long time. But I can read other writers as well. So
There's many other writers that do things which are close to what we do.
yes,
There's no doubt about that.
very close.
Some of them could be co-opted. No doubt. But the thing is that OuLiPo is not a movement, as it has been said. It's a group, it's a small group of writers that want to work and meet. And there's a limit to meetings, as you noticed. Nobody can, when I talk, nobody else talks here. And so it takes a long time. If you have a group of more than 15 people around the table, it's dead. So we have no ambition of growing too much. At the same time, we are always looking for new members in many languages. We have views on writers which write in Spanish. We have ideas of people we would like to have in the group that write in English or in American.
That's a thing they say in France. It wasn't a dig.
Or they say that in England too. And so, no, the thing is, we know that they exist. There is a small group which does exactly the same thing as we do in Italy, which is called OuLiPo, and they do the same thing. And it has always been difficult for us to pick out a member of OuLiPo, to tell him to join the group of OuLiPo, because OuLiPo is international, OuLiPo is Italian, that we didn't want to make any, it would be difficult to take someone from a group and say you are a member of OuLiPo and not the others.
Right.
So we didn't choose. There was a young a woman which was very interesting for us, and there is now Maravelis, who's a very interesting writer, and we will never ask him to join OuLiPo because he's already a member of OuLiPo. It's a matter of group and meetings, and it's not a movement we don't wish to grow.
I see.
I have a question about whether there exist long form experiments that are carried out across several pieces of work. An example would be with press work without letter E and then with only letter E. If there are other more sustained examples of iterative process over several works.
Top secret.
The interesting thing, you were thinking about, for example, novelty about the letter A. Yes? The interesting thing is that when you look at the book of Perec, you think, well, one book has been done, it's finished, why make another one? For example, it seems to be the horizon, the sideline seems to be, couché. But it's still possible because Jacques Jouet is writing a novel now without the letter E, which could be a total, in fact it's called limitation, which is also without letter E. So it's possible to do another one, which is incredible because the book of Perec seemed to have closed the case. No more book is possible to be written without the letter E, and still it is, which is surprising for all of us. Of course, you don't write the same book, and you write a book knowing that the book before has been written. So you have to play with this.
We have time for one more question.
Sorry, let me just add. I think an extremely interesting example of that is there's a book that just came out in English called Winter Journeys, which Perec wrote a short story in 1979 that's a very simple story. It's not very Oulipian, it's not constrained, but it's about this guy who finds a book that he initially takes to be, he finds a book of poetry that he thinks is kind of a pastiche of Baudelaire and Rimbaud and Verlaine and all of them, and then he realizes that it was published before all of them. And so it's sort of a dramatization of this Oulipian idea of what's called plagiarism by anticipation, which is what we call people who were doing Oulipian things before the OuLiPo existed, so we don't have to pay the royalties. And so Perec wrote this story that had this kind of interesting hypothetical, like what if you found the source text of all of French poetry? And he published it, nothing happened until about 1991, thereabouts, and Jacques Roubaud wrote a sequel to it. It takes the same story and just pushes it off into a different direction and answers some of the questions that have been left open by Perec and introduced new questions. And then a few years later, Hervé wrote another sequel, and so on, and now there are about 20 sequels to the same story, and it's almost everybody in the OuLiPo has written one. And everyone takes up the same themes, the same story, totally cognizant of what's been written before, but works out his or her own preoccupations and adds his or her own kind of spin on the same story. And it's not a totally linear trajectory. It's like very disjointed in certain places, but sometimes it's like it picks up the same thread, and it's sort of serial novel that's collectively authored, and it's completely fascinating experiment. It's also a really good story, and it's like just such a wonderful thing to think about variations on. We're doing a reading on Friday at Green Apple, focused on that book, which just came out, and it's just also been anthologized for the first time in French. So all like 21 installments in that series have never been published together until earlier this year. So I think that's to me the most exciting example of an iterative, albeit collective, writing project.
Yeah, I personally really resonate with the idea of using creative constraints as a way to drive the creative process. But I also noticed that you guys are all pretty funny. How much of this is just done to like screw with the reader? Or is there much of a component of that? Are you guys literary trolls?
Never
Never
screw the reader. That's one of the unwritten rules that the OuLiPo. Never screw the reader. Never. No. Oh no.
We're still funny. Okay.
This idea of screwing the reader.
Oh, that's
It's a very
lovely.
old. Is born in France, I think, and I'm repeating something that Kardec said, with a writer which is called Alphonse Allais, who's the first one who ever screwed the reader. And I will tell you, it's a short story of Alphonse Allais, which is the exact typical example. It's called Les Templiers.
Les Templiers.
Les Templiers. In Les Templiers is the story of a guy who's on a boat with a guy called Schwarzmann. And with Schwarzmann, he's going around the Atlantic. And then suddenly, there is a storm, and the boat sinks. And Starkman and Schwarzmann, no, I'm sorry, Starkman, he goes on a small boat to escape from the boat who's sinking, and they get on the island. And then they get on the island, and Starkman, no, not Starkman, Schwarzenstein and his friend are going to a castle. And going to the castle, they go to the forest, and they have to cut the forest to go to the castle. And Schwarzenstein, no, not Schwarzenstein, Schwarzenblock arrives in the castle, and he opens the door, and then he sees the Templars, the Templars Knights, and the Templars Knights are frightening, and they run to them, and then Schwarzenblock, no, Duval, what a guy, is Duval. And then the novel stops. It's finished, it's much longer than that. Then the novel stops. This is screwing the reader. And I was so happy to see that. And so I have a novel like this, which is Screwing the Reader. It was written by a Japanese writer, and it was a police story. And the police story went on and on and on, and then there was 3 possible coupables. Culprits. And they were gathered in a room, and the commissar, the inspector, the detective, is there, and he says, I know that one of you is responsible for his murder. And then there was a light in the sky of Hiroshima.
That's not the way of screwing the reader. That's the way of telling a story.
It is a story.
That's a good way of telling stories. Those are good stories. No, that's not the idea. But of course, we are conscious that we have readers, even if we have one, our wives, for example, which happens which happens quite often. And so, even if we have one reader, we know that we have one. So this is quite different from writing for yourself. We write to be read. You know, Marguerite Duras. You know Marguerite Duras. You cannot mistake her for an Oulipian. And she was a friend of Raymond Queneau. And they were, seeing each other quite a lot at some point. And Marguerite Duras said, Queneau was a major asset in my life because he made me understand that somebody is reading over my shoulder when I write. And so that was the big thing for Marguerite Duras, even for Marguerite Duras. So for us, we hope to have at least 3 shoulders each, just to read over. And I think this is thinking that you have a reader at some point is starting to play. It's starting to play. It's not to screw them, it's to play with them. Let's share something. Oh, let's do that. This one's for you. And this is the idea. And it's not like the idea of screwing, it can be surprising. It can be astonishing. It can be things like this. Puzzling, but not screwing.
So screwing is the last word.
We're gonna end on that word, but before we do, let you know, there are going to be readings tomorrow night at the Mechanics Institute. They have made a very generous offer, which is to say anyone here who shows up and says they're a guest of City Lights will be admitted for free. It's like a $12 admission for like members or less, but I know that there were some folks in the audience tonight who actually, couldn't afford it, and they were like, eh. But, Laura Shepard, who actually is one of our partners, who actually, I'm going to take a second to also thank some of our partners. Glenn Helfand at the Art Institute, and then our friends at the French Cultural Services, Stéphane Ray. They've all helped bring this together, and we're really very appreciative. So tomorrow, 6 o'clock, we'll be joined also by Doug Newfer, who's come down from Seattle, and to be with us. Rachel Galvin, who's a great translator, and they're all going to be reading, wonderful excerpts. On Friday, as Daniel mentioned, if you're out in the Richmond, there's going to be Winter Journeys reading, and then the workshop is on Saturday. If you have not signed up, we're close to the edge. There's still a little bit of space. I think the writing workshops are pretty much full now. Right? Yeah. But we've got a little bit of room for cartooning, illustration, and for sound. So with that said, hope to see you soon, and thank you all for coming.
If you want to come tomorrow, this is the reason why I made a photograph at the beginning. So now we can chat. Okay, so